Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. I am always so very grateful for those of you who tune in. And it is always my prayer and intention that the conversations that we bring will help you in some way, whether on your own grief journey or those you love and are supporting through theirs. So today I am very excited to introduce you to our guest, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh. I pronounced your last name correctly.
Oh, Bowslaugh.
Bowslaugh. Thank you. Randi is a mental health advocate and author and YouTuber. She started writing at 14 years old as a coping strategy for her own mental health struggles with depression. 20 years later, she is now a mom, a grandmother, and thriving creative individual. She has a lot of talents, actually, and a champion kickboxer. I've got to throw that in because I think that that's pretty amazing. I invited Randi on the show today. She's had a lot of different kind of losses in her life, but today we're going to focus on the loss of her brother, Brandon, who died 2 years ago. And I know that Randi, you have also written a book about it, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit. But please, I want to jump right into your story. Tell us a little bit about you, your brother, and anywhere you would like to begin.
Sure. So Susan and I were just having a good conversation, and I was giving her the Cliffs Note version of my life. And as most people do, they went, oh, what? So yeah, at 14, I started writing to deal with my first kind of bout with depression. Didn't know that it was depression at the time. Just thought everybody felt the same way at 14. Turns out they don't. From there, though, I had my kid when I was 18. I got married at 25. He had a daughter as well, so I have two kids and a grandbaby now. And I also have a couple cats, a couple dogs, and yeah, that's the fun part of me. So then Susan wants me to talk about my brother, Brandon, because 2 years ago on May 20th, he died by drug overdose. And so growing up with him, we have the same mom, different dads, but we grew up in the same house. It was never like, oh, that's just my half brother. No, that was my brother. And so as kids, we did silly things as kids do. We play video games together. We took a snake for a walk and then lost it under a school portable. Yeah, we did some things. Watched Saturday morning cartoons, but I was the younger sister. He was older than me by 4 years. And when he became a teenager, well, probably beforehand, but again, being the younger sister, there was a lot about what was happening that I was shielded from, which as a parent, I totally get. I would have probably done the exact same thing. But I didn't realize how intensely my brother was being bullied and why he kept having to move schools. And eventually that led him to drugs. You find the bad friends, you get into bad things, and he never really got out of it. So, to make a very long story short, he got into drugs as a teenager. He was in and out of jail for most of his life, and we lost him 2 years ago.
And when you say in and out of jail, because I know I did a lot of volunteer work in the prison systems, helping these men right through their trauma. And was he in and out of jail because he was stealing to buy drugs? There was so much of that in the prison system where
Yes.
so many of them had addictions and they really, you know, don't get me started on the prison system. Most of them don't belong
Right.
there. They belong in a rehab center. So is that what was going on with your brother?
Yeah. I mean, there might be other things to it, but for the most part, it was that because when addiction takes hold, you do whatever you have to do to get that fix.
So during this period of time, it sounds like, did he graduate from high school?
No.
Okay, so he dropped out?
Yeah. So he was in and out of juvenile detention, so youth jail. And when he was in jail, he had to take courses for high school, but he never got enough credits to actually graduate because when he was out of jail, he just never went, which was very unfortunate because he was really quite smart and very talented. So actually, he got one of his art pieces that he did while in jail. It was in a museum for a little bit. So he was very talented, and We always said, be a tattoo artist then, or take what you have and use it. But again, when that addiction is too strong, how do you do that?
So, what was your relationship like with your brother? I mean, did he have periods of sobriety, or did you ever, did he go to rehab? Was he able to maintain sobriety so that,
So he did try at times to maintain his sobriety. So when his first kid was born, my nephew, who's now 19, oh my gosh, when he was first born, I was 16 at the time. I remember babysitting him and all that. And my brother was going to work and he was trying. He really was. But it just didn't last because, in my opinion, anyways, and I'll never know the whole story to anything, he never dealt with any underlying issues. He never dealt with his anxiety. He never dealt with any of the trauma that he experienced as a child and probably in the criminal justice system as well. But he never dealt with any of that. So, as much as he would try, he didn't do anything to help himself internally. All he would do is try to maintain the external, I'm sober, it's fine. And he also would say things like, well, I can drink, that's fine. It's drugs I shouldn't do. So there was a little disconnect for him in that regard as well. So he often fell off the wagon. I can remember other times that, he would be trying to get sober. I remember one time specifically, I was in college, and this is before I had really delved into my psychology courses in school. I didn't know a heck of a lot. But he said, I really want to get sober. I need help. I need to not be in the same city. And I lived about half an hour from where he was. So he didn't know anybody where I was. So I said, okay, fine, come and stay with me. He comes. He was there for about a week and it was fine. We were, watch movies, play video games, hang out with the baby because my kid was about 1.5, 2 at the time. And then New Year's Eve came. And he told me, I have to go out for New Year's Eve. Everyone goes out and parties for New Year's Eve. I'm not going out and party. Like, my boyfriend's coming over. We're just going to hang out. You can just hang out. You can just watch movies. No, everybody goes out. And later that night, probably, I think it was before the actual midnight or right around that time, he calls me from the hospital and says, I just overdosed. They brought me to the hospital, but I can't stay here because I'm scared of the police. I was like, okay, but you can't come back here then. Like, you were here because you said that you weren't going to be doing that stuff. And of course, he's begging, pleading with me. And then he says, they want somebody to watch me. So can this girl come too? I don't know who this person is. No, absolutely not. You cannot bring a stranger into my home. And that was one of the times that I realized I can't help him because as much as he says he wants to be sober, he's not taking an active role in his recovery.
so yeah, and of course, addiction is probably one of the most painful things to bear witness to with people that we love. I have lost dear friends to addiction and overdose, and I think it's almost impossible for any of us to not know someone who knows somebody who, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's 5 people removed at the most, where because addiction is just so pervasive and prevalent and all the things. And we know that there has been an uptick of that just since COVID. So it is excruciating because really at the end of the day, the person who is trying to get sober, it is up to them. We can't lock the people we love up, right? And that's sort of
Be easier.
exactly. And I think that that's why, and I've heard this numerous times, that when people are deep into addiction, it is also jail time is typically part of that narrative in some way. And that, and I've heard this from parents, when my kid was in jail, it was the only time that I could actually sleep and rest because that they're safe. So at the time when your brother died, because he died of an overdose, where were you in your own relationship with him? Had you cut the relationship off at that point? What was happening between the two of you?
So it wasn't completely cut off. It was very unstable, but I had actually just spoken to him think it was about the week before, maybe 2 weeks before that, I had spoken to him. So he would often drop into my aunt's house randomly, have a shower, grab some snacks, whatever. And so I was talking to my aunt and he happened to be there. And I said, okay, yeah, sure. I'll talk to Brandon on the phone. That's fine. Because I always told him, I will talk to you as long as you're not going to start calling me names. I will help you to, get to a doctor's appointment or get to rehab or something like that, but I will not give you money. And so it was very strained. And so we tried to have this conversation. And previous to that, it was about 3 months or so that I had a conversation with him. Previous to that, it was probably a couple of years. But I was talking to him and I'm trying my hardest to, oh yeah, things are going well for me. And hey, did you know that I had a grandson now? And that kind of thing. But all he kept saying is, well, when can we see each other? I'm like, well, I told you before that not until you're sober. And I was blaming COVID as well. I was saying, well, we can't because of COVID. Because since he was at my aunt's house, I didn't want to make him upset. Because when he got upset, again, he would start swearing. He would get very dramatic, I guess, is the word that's coming to mind. And I didn't want my aunt to have to deal with that. And so when he did die, I was thinking in my head, should I have said something more about, no, you need to go to rehab or I'm never going to see you? Like, should I have been more firm in that? So there was a lot of guilt when he died because of that. But I know why I didn't say the things that I said. Plus, I don't think it would have made a difference ultimately. But it was very strained. And as we're having this conversation, and I'm trying so hard to tell him, how things are, and I'd say, "Oh, how have you been?" He's not working. All he has is a room in a house that he rents. He doesn't really have anything going for him. So it was
So
really
was
hard to have a
he, sorry to,
conversation.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
pause. So he was living with your aunt. So was he renting a room
Oh
from
no,
your
sorry.
aunt?
He wasn't living with my aunt. He was
Oh,
renting a room in a house and he would just stop into my aunt's to have like a shower and stuff.
so I'm guessing, totally just kind of putting pieces together here. Had your parents shut him off as well? Was he no longer allowed to go to your parents' house?
So his dad, we have different dads. His dad, I've never actually met. His dad had pretty much vanished when he was a kid. And then when my brother was in grade 8, he came back. And my brother was like, I want to go live with my dad. I want to get to know him. My mom said, okay, well, that's your choice if you want to do that. And he lived, I don't even know where. It wasn't in our region, it was somewhere else. And so he went to grade 8 there, living with his dad. My mom went to the grade 8 graduation, and his dad left the graduation after he saw my brother's diploma because my mom had changed his last name to be my mom's last name. And his dad just left without like a word or anything. So he definitely had no relationship with his father at all. And my mom at that time, actually, she was living at my house. And my mom has just, she did have to cut him off because so much she tried to help him. She tried to have him live with her. She tried to rent him his own apartment and, everything she possibly could. But again, ultimately, his decisions didn't lead him to take responsibility for his own actions. So at that point, my mom had to basically just completely cut ties because it was so hard on her.
And so this aunt, is this your mother's sister?
Yeah.
And so she was not able to do that. It sounds like she was still the one person that allowed him to come and take showers and
Yeah. So I love my aunt. I do. But at times I've told her this is not news to her. I've said, you're kind of enabling. But again, that she feels it as it is her God-given duty to have an open home to help those who need help. So I respect that. That's what she thinks, but she knows how I feel about it.
had you, and I know that this is something else that when families have somebody in the family that is dealing with, who's actively using, that you kind of are waiting for that call to arrive at, someday that
Yeah.
you are praying that they're going to get sober, but the other side of you is sort of waiting for that other shoe to drop. When this call came, how did you find out about your brother?
Oh, that's a fun story. So it was, like I said, it was made funny. So I was at the pool store, you have to bring the pool a little sample of your water to test to make sure that your water is all good while you're opening your pool. So I was in line in the parking lot because it was COVID, so you couldn't go in the store. So I'm behind, I don't know, 5, 6 people. And I look at my phone and my aunt had called me, which again is not unusual because I talk to her almost every day. She's like a second mom to me, really. And I was like, okay, that's weird. So I call her back real quick and she says, did you see that on Facebook this person wrote that Brandon was dead? What? No. And this is not the first time this has happened. So I was like, it's probably fake, right? Because it's happened before where somebody's saying that he was dead and he totally wasn't. I'm like, yeah, okay. Let me look into this. I don't believe it. And then I get off the phone with her and I look and I have a message from my brother's ex-girlfriend. And it's saying, we're trying to get a hold of your mom. We can't. Brandon's gone. I was like, hey, wait, what? Because she would not lie about something like that. Absolutely not. She was still, even though it was an ex-girlfriend, they were still very close. They were friends. She was the mom of one of his kids or two of his kids. And so I'm texting her back saying, okay, what is happening? And we get on the phone and she tells me that the Streetworks, so Streetworks is a program in Niagara that helps people on the streets with their addictions. And they try to do whatever it is that they can do to help. And so she said that Brandon worker was at the place that he had died. And the police were there right now. Like everything was happening right in that moment. I go, are you serious? I said, I need to talk to her. So she gave me the phone number of the Streetworks worker. I call her. I'm like, hi, this is Brandon's sister. What is happening? Because at that point, I'm still not really believing what's happened, but I also do know that it's true, but I just don't want it to be. So she's retelling the story. The person that my brother was with called her and said Brandon wasn't waking up. She rushed over on her way over. She called 911. She got there. She tried to give him naloxone. It didn't work. And she kept saying how sorry she was. And I was lost for words, which is very unusual for me. And so I think that she could tell that I was kind of lost. And she goes, do you want to talk to the police officer? And I was like, yes, yeah. Like I need to talk to an authority on this right now. And so the police officer gets on the phone. Hi, I'm detective, whatever his name is. Can't remember. And I say, I'm Brandon's little sister. What is happening? And he proceeds to tell me pretty much the exact same story and that Brandon was dead and that they hadn't been able to get a hold of my mom. So at this time, it was about 4:30, 4:45. Right when my mom gets off work, she doesn't really look at her phone until she gets home because she's not looking at it while she's driving. So I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. I hang up. I'm texting my mom, put your phone away. Don't look at it. Wait for me at home. Don't talk to nobody. Which I'm like, was probably not like she knew something bad was coming, but I didn't want her to hear it from someone else. So I was like, stop looking at your phone right now. And then as I'm doing that, my aunt's calling me back. She didn't even give me a chance to call her. She's calling me back, and I tell her the whole thing that I just heard and said, yeah, it's true. I'm sitting in the parking lot now. I'm on like a curb crying. I have my sunglasses on though, so I'm like pretending that I'm not. The person comes up from the store and I was like, I need my water checked because I'm still there anyways. I can't drive home yet because I'm too emotional. So I give him the water to test, deal with all of that. By the time that's all dealt with, I'm calm enough to drive the 5, 10 minutes home. Luckily, I wasn't far because you should really not drive while you're.
No, and plus you're in shock. To this day, I will never, ever, ever forget the call about my brother's death ever. As long as I live,
Yeah.
I will never forget that feeling of it's such a moment of pure shock that you don't know, you literally have no idea what you're feeling because
Yeah.
you can't take in. So that's what I was asking. Were you kind of always waiting for the call with the
Yeah.
addiction? But even when you're waiting for the call and the call comes, you are still never prepared for the
Yeah.
call.
Oh yeah, I would look at like news articles and stuff. It was like body found. I'd look to see if it was him and stuff because yeah, you're always waiting for that. And so when the call did finally come, I was shocked still. But like you said, like still shocked, but still like in disbelief. Like this can't possibly be happening. I get home and I said to my mom, so she's in the kitchen washing dishes. She looks at me like this look of fear almost. And I pull out the stool and I pat it. I'm like, sit down, mom. Sit. You gotta sit down. And she is moving like a snail. Like it should have taken her 2 steps and then sits down. I'm like, Mom, hurry up and sit down. She goes, no, because as soon as I sit down, you're going to tell me something bad. And of course, yeah, as soon as she sits down, all I can manage to get out of my mouth was Brandon's dead. Like that's it. I couldn't explain anything else to her. Only so that we both start crying, hugging. Eventually, I was able to then tell her what had happened, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was tell my mom that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because I remember, and I write about this, that it felt like I called the phone a hand grenade because I had to call my parents too. And anyone who's ever had to tell their parents that their child has died understands that there is an element of, I want to call it just trauma, that you have got to tell that person, that parent, that their child is no longer alive is probably one of the most devastating things I've ever had to do in my entire life.
Yeah.
So, what, tell me how the death of your brother, because oftentimes guilt, there are so many different things that are wrapped up in a death anyway, but when it comes to drug addiction and those types of things, we can have a lot of guilt because of some of the things that you and I had talked about before we started recording. Is there more that I could have done? Should I have pushed harder? And then what is we sort of go back in time to the last conversation we had with our sibling and what was that like? And did my sibling know that, all of the things that sort of come in waves when we lose somebody. So I would love to hear from you. What was going on for you? It's been almost 2 years.
Yeah.
What was going on for you during that time? And what has happened as a result in your life as a result of your brother's death?
So obviously the initial shock and sadness was there. And then it was just like robot mode for a bit there because it was just me and my mom. So I had to help her plan the funeral and the burial and call people. So I was just in robot mode. This needs to be done. This needs to be done. Check it off the list. Once the funeral was done, the burial was still a month away. My mom wanted to wait because the COVID rules were changing. So she wanted to wait to have more people there. But at least once the funeral part was done, I could breathe a little bit more. And that's when all of those other emotions started going. So the guilt, playing the last conversation over, what could I have done differently? Could I have made a difference? And then by the time the burial was there was a lot of anger too. And actually at the burial, at the end of it, my mom wanted everybody to go up and talk to Brandon. So the everything was done and everybody went up. And I said, okay, it's your turn. Go up. Oh, it's your turn. Go up. I'm like, talk to him, not about him. And then it's my turn to go up. And by the time that had happened, I knew that everything I had to take care of was done. All of the insurance stuff had been taken care of. Everybody knew that what was happening. He was buried. Everything was paid for. Like it was done. So I was finally able to go, I am mad at you right now, actually. Hold on. And I yelled at him a little bit. And my godmother was walking by and she's like, are you yelling at the boy? I go, yeah, because I'm mad at him. And then I stand up because I was leaning down so nobody could hear me. Didn't work well. And I'm like, and I bet all of you are mad too. And I just let everything out. And told everybody how mad they were too, because we shouldn't have been there burying him right now. And he should have been able to get better and he should have done this and he should have done that. And I'm so mad at him. And after that, it felt so relieving to get all of that out. And so after that, then it was kind of processing the fact that he was gone officially forever. And the weirdest part, I think, is seeing somebody walk down the street going, is that Brandon? Even though I know he never even lived in my city, but they just look that way, right? And then I kept also thinking, his death can't mean nothing, right? He couldn't have went through all of this in his whole life for it to end that way, for it to just, he's gone and nobody cares. Like it just, and not that nobody cares, but there's no lasting impression. Like there's nothing left. And so from that and all the grief, I was like, hey, what would Brandon want if he was here? He would always wanted to help people. He literally gave a person a shirt off his back at one point because they didn't have one and he was going home and he had another one. So, the heart was there. He just could not get over the addiction. So I took all of that, all of the emotions, all of what I knew and threw it into a book wrote a very good, compelling book, which does come out May 20th for his 2-year anniversary. And from there, that was how I was able to finish my grieving process and hopefully help other people with that.
So talk to us a little bit about your book. Would you call it a memoir?
It's like a half a and then like a half a research. So I do go through like the very first chapter is how I got that phone call, the story that I shared in the pool store. Obviously, I go into a lot more detail in the book, but so I go through that, helping my mom plan the funeral, the burial, all of that. Then it goes into depth into quite a bit of research into the criminal justice system. So at the time my brother was through the youth criminal justice system, we had a different legislative act than what is now in place. And so looking at the difference of how far we have come, which definitely we're going in the right direction, but looking at those differences, looking at the DSM-5 for the diagnostical criteria for what is an addiction, because a lot of what I wanted the book to share was for family of people with an addiction to say, it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay if you need to distance yourself from that person. They're still a person, you can still love them. The original title was actually going to be Loving from a Distance because of that. But I ended up with Goodbye Too Soon, which I think suits it better. And then it goes into risk factors about how somebody might develop an addiction. So there's quite a few other components to it than just a memoir.
Yeah, and I just for our listeners who might not understand, when you talked about the DSM-5, it's the diagnostical statistical manual, which is what we use in the field of mental health for diagnoses so that we have a common language. And that's what you're referring to, that you looked up the diagnosis of addiction and etc. So tell me, Randi, how did, so you said that writing the book helped you during your grieving process, which I love because that's what I wrote my dissertation on is the healing benefits of writing through our own grief and loss. What happened to your family as a result of your brother's death? Did it change anything? Did it, like in terms of your mom and how she dealt with it? Did it bring you closer? Because I think that there's always what I call an untimely death. I always, speak to our younger people who die. Your brother was what, 37 when he died?
Yeah.
Didn't have children.
5 kids, actually.
Oh, your brother had 5 children.
Yes, he had 5 kids, and they all sort of lived in various locations.
So did he have a relationship with any of these children?
A little bit with his oldest, but not so much with the others.
Okay. So these are does your mother have any?
Yeah, we see some of them.
Oh, good. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because she would be the grandmother.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh
so
yeah.
so how did his death impact your family? Did it have?
So me and my mom have always been close, and my mom was living with me at the time. I've always been a mama's girl. So, but we did spend a little more time than usual together at that time, but more our extended family. We got together a lot more and kind of built better relationships. So we always did growing up. I was always very close to my aunts and my cousins, but over time, people move away, life happens. So we did all start getting together a little bit more, um, and talking to my other aunt that I didn't talk to as often, getting a better relationship again with her. And we were very close when I was younger, but life. And then with my cousins, being able to see and talk to them more. I've talked to him quite a bit, and he moved 3 hours away with his family, so we hadn't talked in quite some time, and totally unintentionally. And so it really did bring us back together, which was really nice. And my brother was always all wanting family together. That's every time I talked to him, that was what it was. It was, when can we all get together? When can we all get together? And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, when you stop doing drugs.
How did his death impact your life? Did it, because when we were talking about this earlier and you were really doing a beautiful job explaining to me how his death, or not maybe even his death per se, but his life. And have there been any surprises that have come out of this, horrific accident with your brother or this overdose from his death, has it changed you in any way?
So yeah, we were talking about this before. It was really interesting conversation because nobody has ever actually asked me that question before. And so his death in and of itself wasn't the catalyst for anything specific other than writing that book, but his life and being the younger sister and seeing him start going down that path with the drug addiction really had an impact on me as a kid. So, I mean, lots of different impacts. I mean, at some points I was hating him, of course, and sometimes I was like, get out of my face. But, siblings and teenagers, that's kind of normal. But as I watched him, it got me interested in psychology. It got me interested in learning more about mental health, about addiction. Like, what is all of this? Why is he the way that he is? Why is anybody the way that they are? And so in college, I took community and justice services, and that's kind of what got me into the wanting to know more about the Criminal Justice Act and stuff. So that's why that component of the book was so interesting to me because I went to school for it. And then I also continued in psychology through university as well. And I did my college placement at a drug and alcohol recovery house for men. And it was just so enlightening to see all of these different people. And not all of them made it through their stay. Some of them ended up having to be kicked out. Some of them had been in and out of it for a few times because it doesn't usually stick the first time. And so it was so interesting. And I don't think I would have been interested in that stuff had it not been for Brandon. And hopefully from my interest in those things and doing school for psychology and that kind of thing, hopefully I'm helping people. And I wouldn't have really went down this path if it wasn't for him. So huge impact on my life, even if he never really knew it.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Are you doing anything with psychology now?
Not specifically. So I did work in social services for 5 years or so. I was an employment counselor, dealt with a lot of people with anxiety, depression. That was the big one. But social services is a very difficult industry to
Yes,
stay in,
it sure is.
especially government funded,
Yes.
and certain statistics that you have to hit. And it wasn't for me. However, because I write a lot of nonfiction, I do a lot of these podcasts. I have my own podcast where I talk about mental health. I am doing something with that knowledge, just not in the traditional sense.
Right, but I mean, I think that, what I enjoy most, and enjoy is such a interesting word when I do a grief and loss podcast, but the crux of this though is how it can impact the trajectory of our life. And, and it can send us down a new path that we probably would not have gone down if it were not for this traumatic event that has happened to us. And so, and it sounds like, that with you and your brother, you had this deep love. And at some point, resolved might be too strong of a word, but I'll just use it for lack of of a better word, that you had resolved yourself, that your brother was deep in his addiction. You hoped for his sobriety, but you didn't sound like you had these high hopes that he was going to be able to stay sober, and that his addiction impacted you throughout his life until his death. And from that experience with your brother, you have taken that and you are bringing that forth to try to help other people at least understand if they have somebody in their life who has an addiction issue, because it is such an excruciating, painful road to travel, as I said earlier, with somebody that you love, because you cannot force somebody into recovery. You just can't.
Yeah.
We can support them the best we can once they're in recovery, but it becomes up to them to, it's a solo struggle, I think, where you can be surrounded with as much support as you want, but it really is up to the individual. Is there anything else that you would like to share about this experience that maybe I didn't ask?
Well, something that kind of popped into my head as you were talking just there is the impact it has on the whole family, right? So we did a little bit talk about my mom and me and my cousins, but watching my nephew, my nieces, it's kind of like it's so heartbreaking. And I had no words to tell them. And especially they had such different views of who their dad was because they're about 3 years apart. So Brandon was such a different person when each of them were born as well. So it was really hard to just there was no right thing to say. So if you're going through something like that, know that there isn't going to be a right thing to say. All you have to do is just be there for the person.
Yeah. So you do still have a relationship with some of your nieces and nephews, your
Oh yeah.
brother's children. That's good. Yeah, that's wonderful. Because that doesn't always happen either, right? Because you said they're sort of peppered all around and
Yeah. Yeah,
um
I feel very lucky that way that I can still see some of them. The one just started college this year. Well, last year, I guess in September, but I'm just like I text them every so often. So how's college going?
yeah, that is great. So I always end with a couple of questions and then I'll ask you where people can find you. But oftentimes when we have a deep loss, it changes the way we think about our life and how we think about self-love and what that means to us. I know that after my brother's death, it really, really shifted the way I think about what it means to take care of myself. What does self-love mean to you?
Showing yourself the kind of love that you would show somebody else that you love. That's kind of the short and sweet of it because we're often our own worst critics and we
Yes.
often would not say the things we say to ourselves to somebody else.
Yes.
So love yourself the way that you treat somebody else that you actually love too.
That's beautiful. Finish the sentence for me. Hope is.
Well, the word that popped into my head was believing. So I'm just going to roll with that because it was the first thing that popped in.
Okay. Hope is believing. Excellent. Well, Randy, thank you so much for spending this hour with me. Where can people find you? You've got a gorgeous website because I've been all over
Thank you.
it.
So, yeah, my website is rbwriting.ca. All of my books are available on Amazon. Goodbye Too Soon, the one that we've been talking about the most, is on for pre order, even though it's not out until May 20th. You can definitely go on and pre order it now so you don't forget. I'm on Facebook at RB Writing. I am on YouTube at Write or Die Show. I am on Instagram, Randy Bowslaugh, TikTok, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh.
Okay. Well, that's great. We'll have all of those links in the show notes too. Okay. Anything else before we say goodbye?
Go buy my book. No, I would love for everybody to follow because I definitely talk a lot about this kind of stuff and other kinds of mental health. So if it's of interest to you, if it's helpful content, then please, yeah, come on over, give us a follow and send me an email and be like, hey, have you ever talked to somebody about whatever? And I probably have.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that because because something that you do is you work with writers, right? I mean,
Yes.
that is like a big piece of what you do in your own business. So thank you for that. And I want to thank you for spending a time with us today and sharing your story of your brother Brandon. And I would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Thanks, you guys. I love you all, and we will see you here next week. Bye for now.